this video is about how my new machine works. I call this machine the pantorouter because it's essentially a pantograph that mounts a router. The template gets mounted here, and then the router follows the exact same shape of the template here where the stock is. So this allows the machine to reproduce any shape of template that I put here on the stock here at 1/2 scale. I've constructed this simple mechanism to show how a pantograph actually works. If you look on here, you'll notice these two parallelograms are the same size and they always share the same angle, which means that this distance is always equal to that distance. That means if I hold this point fixed and I trace out a shape with this point here, the intersection here will trace out that exact same shape but at 1/2 the scale. But this mechanism actually has some redundant links in it, so removing those, you can still see it behaves the same way. So now, if I put a marker here, and I put another marker here, and I trace out a shape, you can see that this shape is reproduced at 1/2 the scale by this point here. Now on my pantorouter, instead of having magic markers, I put a guide bearing here, and I put a router mount here. And this router mount essentially mounts the router at the exact point that my magic marker was. And that router mount is actually just a printout from the page of the plans that I have for the pantorouter. So looking at the back of the machine, you can see essentially the same pantograph mechanism that I showed on my workbench. And these corners here, these hinge pins, are essentially pieces of steel rod, a lot longer than this one, but same kind of rod, that allows the whole thing to hinge on. I'd use the same kind of steel pins for hinges on my quickset tenon jig, and that's worked out very well. I get really good reproducibility on this machine. So it's like within a fraction of a thou every time. When I was experimenting with the prototype for my mechanism, I found that it was a little bit tiring to always have to pull up by the handle to compensate for the weight of the router. So what I added is these springs here and this cam shape, and that essentially compensates for the weight of the router across its range of motion. I added a similar spring on the other side, so this spring here compensates for the long link and the other spring for the short link. Now if I want to use my machine to carve internal cavities such as a mortise, I need to be able to plunge into the cavity, and I've added essentially a plunge sled on here. This lever operates the sled, and this part here essentially moves the whole back half of the machine on slides. I made the slides out of modified drawer slides. Essentially, these slides make really good linear glides if you modify them. And I have a video about that. So the platform on here is on 2 of these, and that's how it slides. I added a depth stop underneath the table, which allows me to control how deep the router can plunge, which is very useful for controlling how deep a mortise I want to cut. And I also added this other stop here, which I can use to control how far back the table can move, which essentially is a backstop. The primary use for that is to use it to lock the table in place, because if I'm routing some external templates, I don't want my plunge mechanism to actually plunge at all. And finally, I added an external switch for the router. The router's built-in switch is actually right here, which is kind of awkward to reach, and worse yet, sometimes it bumps against the template frame and causes it to flip. So by always turning the router on and off by an external switch, it's normally off, which means if I bump this switch here, it's not going to turn on the router by accident. So that's a really important safety feature. So that's how the pantorouter works. Whatever template you put here, it'll route it here. So this here is a single tenon template, but you can really put any sort of template on there, and because the templates are twice the size of the final joint, they don't have to be quite as precise, so you can make them on the bandsaw. So this here would be, for instance, a template for through dovetail joints, a little keyway template, a multiple mortise template. Each of these tracks is for a mortise. Multiple tenon template, and this one is a multiple dowel template. So each of these washers essentially traces a shape so that you can put integral dowels on the end of a piece of wood. So I hope you enjoyed this video about how this machine works. I've got another YouTube video that shows this machine cutting various types of joints, and I also have plans available for this machine, so if you'd like to reproduce this machine, go check out my plans at woodgears.ca.